On July 14th, 1988, an incredible set of events in Browntown, South Carolina, sparked the legend of a mythical creature in the shadows of the Scape Ore Swamp. The Lee County Sheriff's Office responded to reports of a car damaged overnight, finding tooth marks, scratches, and muddy footprints. This led 17-year-old Christopher Davis to recount a chilling encounter. 2 weeks earlier, after he had a flat tire, he had been confronted by a 7-foot-tall monster. As news of the mysterious lizard man spread, local businesses capitalized on the frenzy, turning the legend into a community phenomenon. So let's take a deeper look into the encounters, descriptions, and what you can expect if you were to run into the lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp. Before we get into the accounts of this creature, I want to add on a little bit of information that really makes this legend all the more compelling. It's easy to write off things to just some country folk in the backwoods seeing hallucinations on moonshine, but when it's not only recent legends but also centuries-old tales of the same exact creature, it makes you wonder, is this monster more than just a legend? The following comes from Myths and Tales of the Southeastern Indians by John Reed Swanton. This book was published in 1929, almost 100 years ago. Several Indians were out together and formed a hunting camp. A hunter came back one evening and said, "I have found a big bare tree." He told the rest of the hunters, and they said to one another, "Tomorrow morning we will set out, build a fire there, and smoke the she-bear out so that we can see her." They slept, and the next day started off and came to the place. When they got to where the big tree stood, it looked as if something lived there, and they said to one another, "A bear surely lives here." So they started a fire under it. The smoke filled up the hollow inside, and soon a big lizard came out. The people saw it and ran away. The big lizard jumped down and gave chase. It ran along till it caught one of them and came back with him. It came with him to the big tree and threw him down inside. Then it chased another and did the same to each in turn, overtook, caught, and brought him back. Only one was left. It chased him, and after it had gone a long distance, overtook him and brought him back. When it was coming through a place where the trees were thick, a tiger, for panther, was lying asleep in it. When the big lizard got there with the man, the panther awoke and jumped on it. The lizard let the man go and jumped upon the panther in return, and they began to fight. The man saw this, jumped up, and ran away. Of the people who had gone far away from their homes to hunt, only one came back. He told his people how the big lizard had killed all of the others. What exactly is the big lizard that John Reed was speaking of? We'll never know for sure. It could potentially be a dinosaur of sorts. As we know, there's been legends and sightings of dinosaur-like creatures for centuries existing outside of the time allotted to them by mainstream scientists. Or perhaps this was an ancestor of the lizard man. What do you think? It all began in the fall of 1987 when George Holloman Jr. was riding his bicycle near Scape Ore Swamp, not far from Bishopville, South Carolina. As he took a smoke break, he glanced up and saw something incredibly odd, a 7 to 8 foot tall reptilian humanoid with glowing red eyes. The creature stood still for a moment, then disappeared back into the swamp as a car drove by, and little did George know, his encounter wouldn't be the last. On June 29, 1988, a sighting occurred that would actually capture headlines across the nation and beyond. 17-year-old Christopher Davis was driving home from work at around 2 a.m. when he got a flat tire on a road next to Scape Ore Swamp. So he gets out, pulls out his spare and his tools and are clanking, making some noise, not knowing he was probably attracting the attention of a monster. After changing the tire, he heard ominous thumping sounds and turned to see a humanoid lizard charging at him, its eyes glowing red. Christopher jumps back in his car and immediately drives off, but as he's driving, he hears the thud of something heavy on top of his vehicle, and he knew that whatever this lizard man thing was, it was now on top of his car, and out of sheer terror, he does the only thing that he can think of and starts to drive home. Personally, if I knew that a lizard man was on top of my car trying to get at me, I wouldn't be taking it to where I rest my head at night. But I'm also in the comfort of my home thinking about these things, so I'm sure hindsight is 20/20. So anyway, when he finally made it home, Christopher found his side view mirror had been badly damaged and there were huge scratch marks across the roof. So somewhere along the way home, the lizard man had either fallen off or jumped off. He would later on describe the creature as having 3 big fingers, long black nails, and green rough skin. Following his encounter, more reports surfaced, including one from a couple known as Tom and Mary Wayne, whose car showed signs of a brutal attack with gashes, dents, and even parts of what appeared to have been chewed. However, these folks weren't there to see what it was, but leads us to believe that this lizard man is the three-toed footprints that were discovered near the vehicle. Police would make plaster casts of these tracks, measuring at around 14 inches. They were later deemed unclassifiable, and to mainstream pseudoscience, all of these accounts, footprints, damaged vehicles, and more, and witnesses, this was all a hoax because, I personally would love to scratch up my car and just essentially trash it in the hopes of being labeled a Looney Tune for seeing a lizard man. But anyway, in the years since those initial sightings, reports of the creature have continued to pour in, with some being more credible than others. Some of which include a soldier from the Army Corps of Engineers and a deputy alongside a state trooper who both claim to have encountered the lizard man. In 2015, a woman snapped a photo of what she believed was this creature. This is obviously a fake, but I just thought I'd add it in there for kicks and giggles. But now that we've heard about what these people saw, let's look at how they describe the creature and afterward what you can expect if you run into the lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp. What makes this interesting is that we really only have one source that gives us an all-encompassing look at what the lizard man looks like, which is from Christopher Davis. And something else that's really interesting is that even though other people have seen it, their descriptions don't sway from what Christopher had said. What we have is a large 6 to 7 foot tall creature with green, scaly skin, 3 fingers, long black nails with an extremely aggressive demeanor, and reddish orange eyes. Some accounts say red, some say orange, but with color blindness being a thing, I'd imagine to some people red looks orange and orange looks red, so it isn't a huge deal. Also, considering the encounters really all happen at night, they could just be the reflections against the eye's tapetum lucidum, which is that reflective layer that allows animals like cats to see in the dark. Most reptiles don't have this, but there are a few, such as crocodiles. Honestly, most of the depictions of what this creature looks like seems fairly spot on. I'd imagine its posture and skeletal structure is slightly different than what appears to be just a guy in a suit, but I don't think many people are wondering about its bones when it's charging them. And real quick, before we get into what you can expect if you run into one, I just want to add that all of this seems like it could just be a guy in a suit making this up. And a while back there was a hoaxer that came out to say a large amount of prints that were found were just him, but we have to take each individual piece of information as its own. Looking at this one hoax and saying, oh, okay, that means everything is fake, is akin to a judge saying, oh, the perpetrator doesn't have a record of violence, so it couldn't possibly be him. When you look at the fact that a soldier, a deputy, a state trooper all came forward saying that they saw this thing along with multiple other ordinary civilians having had their cars scratched and torn up, it really doesn't seem likely that this is all a hoax. Why would multiple unrelated people with separate encounters all claim to have seen something that honestly sounds like a bad Amazon movie? I personally feel inclined to at least believe this account somewhat because there's a lot of people who have seen a lot of strange things out there, and there's no telling what could or couldn't be out in Scape Ore Swamp, which leads me to this. If you have had an encounter with a creature of folklore and you want your story told, please send me your story in the fullest details possible at my email. I'll proofread through them to make sure that only those that have a serious encounter are talked about, so you don't have to worry about anyone being made fun of, and I'll also be reading them on my channel. This isn't just restricted to lizard man encounters, but all are welcomed. If you've seen little people, odd flying dinosaur-like creatures, or anything at all out of the norm, please send me an email, and if you'd like to remain anonymous, just let me know and I'll keep it all under wraps. When it comes to the encounters, again, we are very limited, but if we also look at the encounter the creek had with the giant lizard, then it gives us some decent insight into its demeanor towards humans. Christopher Davis was changing his flat tire, probably making a lot of noise the way that metal tools do. He wasn't in the dark of the forest or any place outside of the ordinary. He was just alone in the dark, and he was essentially attacked by this thing, and if he hadn't been quick on his feet and hadn't finished changing his tire, he may have been swept away with the growing number of missing people that seemingly vanish each year. The couple that had their car torn up, Tom and Mary, weren't in their car and just came back to this act of hostility. There were scratches and bite marks and parts that were seemingly chewed for no reason, at least none that we can understand. The police officer, soldier, and state trooper really just saw it but didn't have an encounter, and finally, the creek went in to smoke out a she-bear but ended up being what I'm assuming to be a lizard creature like what we're talking about here. After this, it chased them down and dragged them one by one back to its lair to to probably eat them. So despite the hostility towards Christopher, the couple's car, and the creek, I'd say it's probably just an opportunistic hunter like most. It saw that Chris was alone and took its shot. Perhaps it has some vision issues and saw another car hoping to find a meal waiting inside like a can of tuna, while the creek was dragged back and most likely killed. If they had left it alone, they probably wouldn't have been bothered by it. All in all, I'd just stay out of its territory because you never know when it's hungry. We don't have enough information on this creature's habits to understand what and how often it eats. And until we do, it'll just be part of the legend and mystery. And where mystery lies, adventure awaits. If you like what I do and you want to help support the channel, then the best way to do that is by joining the community on Patreon. I post my scripts and videos early, and I've even done a few videos that you can only find on Patreon. But if you're not into that, then just check out this video that YouTube seems to think you'll love, and I'll see you there.